So if you have heard of Devin Neal being your favorite analyst's favorite sleeper running back, these are likely the things that are making them really excited about Neal. After being a fan of Neal for the past few years, I can confidently say that he's definitely one of my favorite sleepers of the running back position and of the entire class. Hey y'all! For this video, we'll be continuing going through the 2025 running back prospects, covering Damien Martinez from Miami, Devin Neal from Kansas, DJ Giddens from Kansas State, Donovan Edwards from Michigan, and Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. If you're new to these, my running back evals use some different grading methods, which if you want more details on these, you can check out part 1 of the series, which should be accessible with the link that should be on the screen now, as I have more details on how I do the grading in that. Also, if you want to check out my grades and evals of running back from last year for reference, you can check down the link in the description. For any new viewers, I have evals and full scan reports out for Ashton Genty, Bashal Toon, Cam Skadbu, and much more in part 1, which you can check on my channel. I'll be continuing to go through my top 35 running backs in the draft, so to be sure you don't miss any other parts of the running back series or any other position groups in the future, be sure to subscribe. Now let's get this started by taking a look at Damien Martinez. Also, before we get started, as I mentioned in my previous videos, I'm a contributor for DLF or DynastyLeagueFootball.com. If you haven't used DLF or want to try to use their premium service, new users can use my discount code BACKSEAT99 in all caps to sign up for DLF Premium for just 99 cents for the first month. That will give you access to all the articles, rankings, tools, and more. Now, I've also mentioned this before, but I always want to make sure I do repeat this just to make it clear. That makes DLF Premium 99 cents for the first month. And if you don't like it, you can cancel it within that first month and not be charged more than 99 cents. But if you do forget to cancel it after the first month, or you just want to continue having it and using it, it'll be $12.99 every month after the first month. Starting with a look at Damien Martinez's stats, he had the lowest volume in his career as a rusher at Miami, but still was very consistent. He managed to rush for just over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns on 159 carries for a yards per carry average of 6.3. While his volume as a rusher was down, his volume as a pass catcher was actually the highest of his career, totaling 17 receptions for 204 receiving yards. Which I know isn't that impressive, but that was about 50% increase from his previous career highs, so that is still a good improvement for him at least. What was also a good improvement for him was his lack of fumbles. He had some issues with fumbles in the past, with 3 last year, but had 0 this season. Hopefully that's a sign that he put the fumble issues behind him and will protect it on a regular basis now. When looking at the highlighted games for Martinez against Iowa State, Georgia Tech, Duke, and Louisville, first I just want to admit that it is a pretty easy schedule if we're looking at the hardest games being those games. But anyways, he did put up good numbers in those highlighted games. His bowl game against Iowa State immediately jumps out with 14 carries for 179 rushing yards, a touchdown, and a reception for 6 yards. Now he did have a 75-yard rushing touchdown that definitely helped his final stat line, but even without that run, he still ran for 104 yards on 13 carries, which is an average of 8 yards per carry. So while Iowa State definitely doesn't have the strongest defense, and I also believe that they had a couple of their starters sitting out that game, it was still a dominant performance. The other 3 games against Georgia Tech, Duke, and Louisville were all solid with at least 66 yards rushing in each and averaging at least 5.4 yards per carry. What isn't as impressive is his minimal receiving work that aligns with the season totals. He failed to get more than 2 receptions and 20 yards receiving in any of the highlighted games and only had more than 2 receptions and 21 yards in a single game all season. So, based off all that, we might be looking at a 2-down back, but to know for sure, let's start to take a look at some of his grades. For his contact balance and elusiveness, Damien Martinez is one of the most physical runners in this class. He is such a strong rusher with a great downhill approach when he reaches the second level. Once he reaches full speed at the second level, he can sometimes be a freight train with his combination of speed, size, and power, and will just truck through some poor secondary players. Also, he can break through tackles thanks to his great pad level and balance. He typically will also finish most of his runs going forward and has great drive to push piles and short yards and goal line touches. When he does try to avoid contact, he has good timing and good enough explosiveness in his cuts to give him a chance to be able to avoid the tackle in open space. However, he can be a bit stiff when he's trying to change his direction and doesn't have enough wiggle to consistently make defenders miss in space. That led him to often just lowering his pads instead of trying to minimize contact. So with great size and strength to shake off blocks, Martinez earned an A- for his contact balance. Due to being able to avoid tackles but still being a little bit too stiff to be able to consistently avoid tacklers, he earned a B for elusiveness. As a pass catcher, he will have his moments where he struggles, but I wouldn't consider him a liability by any means. Also, he has improvements he needs to make as a pass protector, but he seems to do a good job identifying his assignments. When he does get scored at his target and uses his hands, he can look pretty solid in pass protection, which does give some hope he can eventually improve if he gets more reps. That being said, while he isn't a liability as a pass catcher, it is far from a strength of his. His routes are sloppy and he just doesn't look confident going on his routes. Also, he has lapses in hand technique which leads to drops or need to double catch the balls that were thrown away from his frame. Something that led to those issues was his difficulty tracking the football. There were times where it seemed like the ball snuck up on him and he had late hands when going for the ball. When he does catch the ball, he can sometimes have a slight hitch in his step when he needs to transition from being a pass catcher to a runner. Now, like I said, while I don't consider him a liability as a pass catcher, I do think it's fair to consider him a liability as a pass blocker, which is really disappointing with his frame. He ducks his head and lunges a lot, which leads to a lot of low-quality blocks. He does do a good job trying to use leverage, but he often sabotages it with bad timing, poor execution with his hip roll, and a poor base which worsens his anchor and decreases sustainability of his blocks. So those are all areas that absolutely need to be cleaned up if he doesn't want to come off the field in every third down or 2-minute situation. So after a good start, we have some more humbling grades with Martinez earning just a C- in receiving, and a very poor D for pass blocking, which is especially disappointing with his size. For his vision and ball handling, he has good vision out in space, including good peripheral vision to find his blockers and put them to work. Closer to the line of scrimmage, he does a good job hooking his blocks and getting skinny through tight creases despite his bigger size. He also runs with a good tempo to seek out openings. That being said, he did look a bit less confident in his eyes this year, and he needs to get his confidence in his vision back. This year he seemed much more indecisive around the line of scrimmage and really struggled at times reading the leverage of his blocks and zone runs. Getting used to a different scheme and offensive line can definitely require an adjustment, but the problem is he'll basically have to do the same thing in the NFL, and he can't afford to have a slow start to training camp. I was also a bit disappointed to see him miss cutback lanes at a pretty high rate this year, which led to more runs being unnecessarily bounced outside. Also, as I mentioned before, he did have 0 fumbles this year, which is great to see, and hopefully he can keep that up in the NFL. So though I was a big fan of his vision at Oregon State, it did regress a bit this year and ended up earning just a B this year. With no fumbles though, he was able to earn an A for his ball handling. For his future role grade, I hinted at this earlier, but he does seem to be more of a 2-down back, which is totally fine, but it does limit his upside. However, he does have great athleticism with an exciting blend of speed, size, power, and enough burst to be a great runner. Also, he has great contact balance, and while his vision did take a step back this last year, it has historically been very good and still was good at Miami. I'm not comfortable trusting him on passing downs right now, but at the very least he has the size to be a contributor if he does respond well to NFL coaching. I'm not comfortable trusting him as a blocker on passing downs right now, but he does at least have the size to be a contributor if he responds well to NFL coaching. Also, I'm not comfortable having him take a high volume of passes, and I'd be surprised if NFL teams would expect this out of him based on his college career. So Martinez likely being limited to being a 2-down back, but at least still being a great rusher, he earned a B- for a future role grade. With his great athletic testing at his size, Martinez earned a green flag for his athleticism or RAS score. As a summary of Martinez's strengths, he has great size and is a very physical runner that pairs well with athleticism that makes him a freight train once he gets to full speed. He isn't just a thumper though who runs with just no plan, as he has very good vision, especially in open space. In more narrow spaces around the goal line, he has very good drive to help convert in those situations. Also, he completely eliminated fumbles this year, which was awesome to see since he can't afford to give up the ball with some of his limitations in the passing game. Speaking of those limitations in the passing game, his hands can be shaky due to lapses in his hand technique, which did lead to some drops and double catches. He is also inexperienced as a route runner, which shows in his routes being pretty sloppy. He is also a very poor pass blocker at this time, which is a bummer since he has the size and physicality to be wrecking some guys if he had better timing and technique. Also, he looked a lot less confident in his vision, especially around the line of scrimmage, so he'll have to work to ensure that he doesn't have that slight timid approach in rookie camp. Finally, in open space, while he can run past defenders, he can sometimes have trouble making them miss due to his bit of stiffness that he has. So by taking the average of all his grades, Martinez earned a 2.72 out of 4, which falls in my may have a future role tier. Martinez is definitely a player who I can definitely understand if others have him higher. He has great size and strength and enough speed and burst to really be a productive rusher. However, if his vision does take a bit of a step back again, or he continues to have a minimal role on passing downs, I just have a hard time seeing him be that productive in the NFL. At the very least, I really want to see him use his size in pass protection and become a capable pass protector. That at least will keep him on the field for more downs and could lead to him eventually being more as a pass catcher in the future. If he fails to do this, I fear he could become the next Chris Rodriguez Jr., Zamir White, Khalil Herbert, and so on, of who are great 2-down backs, but really struggle to get a role with the team due to limitations in their ability. As for a comp, I have Darius Geis as Martinez's comp. Both were primarily 2-down players, but were both very strong rushers with thick build and enough speed. That led them to be wreaking havoc if they got to the second level and typically got good drive on most carries. However, neither are great pass catchers or pass blockers, which could impact their usage. Also, neither have great speed and are a bit stiff, which can impact their ability to deliver on bigger plays. Both could also be a bit slow to act around the line of scrimmage and could have some misreads of their blocks. We didn't get to see what Geis would look like in the NFL due to his injuries and criminal activity, but putting the terrible crime history aside, I do think if Geis wasn't an awful individual, and had he stayed healthy, he could have been a productive 2-down back in the NFL. I think Martinez is capable of doing the same, but it will just depend on if teams will value a back as limited as Martinez, and if he can bring enough to the table as a rusher to get him snaps. Going to our next back, we have Devin Neal from Kansas. Starting with basic stats, Neal had another very productive year, rushing for 1,266 yards and 16 touchdowns on 219 carries, which equals out to 5.8 yards per carry. In the beginning of the year, he wasn't as involved in the passing game as previous seasons, but started to be leaned on a lot in the second half of the year and finished with 24 receptions and a touchdown and a career-high 254 receiving yards. Looking at his highlight games against Colorado, BYU, Kansas State, and Illinois, we have a bit of a mixed bag. Starting with likely the best game of his career against Colorado, where he rushed for 207 yards and 3 touchdowns on a whopping 37 carries. He also did this while making 4 receptions for 80 yards. Those were ridiculous numbers, and he looked unstoppable that game. The underrated part of that performance, though, for me at the very least, was the fact that he handled 41 touches and was still his usual efficient self. I had concerns about if he could handle a bigger workload since he didn't have many games in his career with 20 or more touches before this season, but he silenced those concerns with me with 6 games with at least 20 touches this year, and still being effective in all of them throughout the season. A game he wasn't as effective in was his BYU game, which was Neal's worst game of the season, with just 52 yards and 2 touchdowns and only adding 10 yards on 3 receptions. Against Kansas State, he wasn't as active on the ground with just 66 yards rushing and a touchdown on just 13 carries, but he was very active as a pass catcher with 5 receptions for 36 yards. That's the thing that was also really good to see from Neal, is his consistent usage in the passing game. He had at least 1 reception in all of his final 9 games and 3 or more in 5 of his final 7 games. So again, he can be leaned on a lot and has a lot of versatility on both the ground and as a pass rusher. Going to Neal's contact balance and elusiveness, Neal does a good job keeping his legs moving through contact and will often have a sturdy base to maintain his balance. What really helps him stay up though is his elusiveness and footwork. He is so slippery with his weaving and has really pretty footwork that he pairs with good timing to make defenders miss. I know Colorado's defense has a lot of poor tacklers on it, but that game was the best showing of his ability to make defenders miss and will be a game most fans point to as if they want to bring up lofty projections for him. That being said, Neal still needs to work on his contact balance. He's still too much of an upright runner and was taken down by arm tackles way too frequently for his size. When he does drop his pads, he often leans far too much forward and will lose his balance and lack great drive. In short yard situations, his go-to move is often just trying to go much slower than anyone else, and does it by going head first, which is not only ineffective, but also dangerous. And when things are congested, he can sometimes have his legs freeze with initial contact, which can further limit his gain. He's going to have to work to get more consistent drive to not be replacing short yards in red zone situations. He will also need to expand his creativity in open field to maximize his athleticism and be as dynamic as he can be. He doesn't always do a great job setting up his blocks downfield, which can limit his gains from being even bigger. Also, there were other times on longer runs where it seemed like he was getting gassed and would just settle to just running in a straight line instead of trying to make a move to make a defender miss. So I want to see his either better conditioning or creativity to help finish those runs in the end zone. It's important for him to take that next step in those areas since he lacks great top end speed to get away with it and outrace his defenders. So with Neal's contact balance being more disappointing than I would like, he earned just a C for his contact balance. However, with his great feet and ability to make defenders miss, he earned an A- for elusiveness. For receiving and pass blocking, he catches the ball with really clean hand technique and looks comfortable catching it away from his frame with great tracking skills. He also has very natural transition from receiver to runner and even has a good eye for openings in the defense when he's out on routes, which further cements his comfort in the passing game. While he isn't as comfortable as a pass protector, it isn't without effort. He isn't afraid to take on contact and has active feet to try to keep up with his block. Also, he does do some of the foundational things like setting up to have good leverage and identifying his assignments, which hopefully should translate to better success in the future. While the effort is there, his base of the blocker often fluctuates between being too wide and too narrow, which often wastes his effort. Also, he can sometimes mistime his hands when he goes for a block, which can put him at risk of holding penalties. Those misfires with hands and poor base lead to poor angles and improper contact, which allow the defender to easily slip past him. So with really good upside as a receiver, Neal earned a B for his receiving grade. However, due to his technique lapses and difficulty holding blocks, he earned just a C- for his pass blocking. For his vision and ball handling, last year he sometimes struggled to find a good balance and would often shift between being too patient or unnecessarily bouncing runs outside. This year he took a massive step forward by getting downhill more consistently while still showing good patience for holes to develop organically. He runs a really good tempo to give time for the openings to develop and has great chop steps to be able to pair with his explosive burst to break through those openings. He also showed a better ability to hug his blocks while still getting skinny through holes and have a better eye for leverage of his blocks. When he gets to the second level, he can look like a boxer with the way he can use jump cuts to pivot around defenders and to clear areas. The big thing that may need to be examined closer though is that while Neal did show great vision, it is fair to recognize that his offensive line often creates some pretty large holes that made things easier for him. Finally, for his fumble rate, Neal had a very low fumble rate this year due to having just a single fumble against Kansas State, which equaled out to a fumble on every 243 touches. So with some of the best vision in the class, Neal ended up earning an A- for his vision. For his ball handling, with just one fumble on over 200 touches, he earned an A- for his ball handling. For Neal's future role grade, there isn't a lot Neal can't do. He's a very capable pass catcher in a threat in open space, whether it's after the catch or when he bursts through the line after finding an opening with his great vision. He also has great athleticism and his size and great explosiveness in his cuts to make defenders miss in open space. So he should be up there with one of the best running backs, right? Well, he might be, but his disappointing contact balance does really scare me. He absolutely needs to improve his pad level and play to his size. Also, his really poor pass blocking could lead him to being taken off the field on passing downs, which could then make his good pass catching skills basically be worthless. So while there is a lot of good about Neal, the things he is bad at could neutralize a lot of his upside. So with more good working in Neal's favor, he ended up earning a B for his future role grade. For his athleticism RAS score, though he didn't have an amazing forward time, his explosiveness was evident in his jumps, and the forward time was still good enough for his size to get a RAS score of an 8.6, which equals out to a green flag. For a summary of his strengths, Neal staying for his senior season helped him develop some of the best vision in this class. Thanks to that and his quick feet and elusiveness, he's able to be a very efficient back and regularly make defenders miss. He also has great burst to blow through holes and get big gains when there's an opening. Finally, he showed a lot of talent as a pass catcher and could have this be an even bigger part of his game in the NFL if he goes to the right team. So if you have heard of Devin Neal being your favorite analyst's favorite sleeper running back, these are likely the things that are making them really excited about Neal. After being a fan of Neal for the past few years, I can confidently say that he's definitely one of my favorite sleepers of the running back position and of the entire class. That being said, his poor pass blocking and contact balance do really make me nervous about being so bullish about him, since those deficits can sometimes end in disaster for NFL running backs. Also, contact balance also limits his ability to finish short yardage plays, which could be frustrating for NFL teams. Teams could also get frustrated with his lack of creativity in open space, as he can have too many times where he just tries to outrun the defenders, which, as we saw with his 40 time at the combine, won't be a winning recipe in the NFL. So by taking the average of all his grades, Neal earned a 2.95 out of 4, which falls in my good role player tier. There's a lot to like about Neal, and there is a path for him to become one of the best backs in the class. I think his biggest fans will point to his highlights and talk about how he could be the next Le'Veon Bell. While it definitely is a possibility, I worry about his contact balance and pass blocking ultimately holding him back from getting more snaps and opportunities. He has the size to improve his contact balance, and as I mentioned in my midseason ranking series, some NFL teams are willing to punt on a back's pass blocking if they want him to try to use him as a playmaker. So there is a path for these to be non-issues, but he still needs to prove that they can be ignored. So while I do think Le'Veon Bell is a bit of a lofty projection for Neal, I think Chuba Hubbard would be a fair comp for Neal. Both Hubbard and Neal ran with very good vision and quick feet to be able to work their way through holes. Both are also very capable pass catchers and are slippery in space to pick up extra yards. Neither have great long speed but have great burst to make up for this. However, both can really struggle as pass protectors, and with their contact balance, that could make teams less optimistic about having them be every down backs. Hubbard has made improvements to prove he can be an every down back, and I think it's very possible for Neal to do the same thing. The big thing will be to be able to find the right team fit and soak in the NFL coaching to be able to hopefully take that next step. Moving to our next back, we have DJ Giddens from Kansas State. So have a look at his basic stats. Giddens was very impressive statistically, rushing for a new career high for rushing yards of 1,342 yards on 205 carries for a career best 6.6 yards per carry. He also had 7 touchdowns and just 2 fumbles. As a pass catcher, he had modest numbers of receptions with 21, but a very impressive 258 receiving yards and a touchdown on those receptions, which spoke to his ability to get yards after the catch as well as how often he was making those catches downfield. I know this is just meant to be a look at his basic stats, but we can see how often he was making those catches downfield based on his ADOT being 1.5 for 2024. If you aren't familiar with ADOT for running backs, that might sound low, but anything positive shows that they are making a fair number of catches past the line of scrimmage. Giddens having his above 1 shows that he's regular in making those catches past the line of scrimmage. Looking at specific games, he had mostly good games with the best being against Colorado, which sounds very similar to Devin Neal, and honestly is pretty similar to a lot of players when they do face Colorado with how bad that defense is outside of Travis Hunter. But either way, he put up 182 rushing yards on 25 carries and 38 yards on 2 receptions, which is still really impressive. He also had a good game against Arizona State with 133 yards rushing on 14 carries and a reception for 6 yards. His games against Iowa State and BYU were solid but nothing special. For the games here, he wasn't heavily involved in the passing game, and his usage would fluctuate as he would be often limited to 1 or 2 receptions per game, and only had 3 or more in 4 of his games this season. So if you've read stuff on Giddens and his receiving ability before, it is something that outside of his receiving totals does need a closer look. So speaking of that, let's start to take a closer look and take a look at some of his grades. Giddens is the most impressive at making defenders miss, but he does have a variety of moves that he can use in open space. When he is ready to use those moves, he can pull them off with good timing to make defenders miss in open space. However, one of the most frustrating things for me to watch is his disappointing contact balance. At his size, he should have the ability to be a bowling ball at times. However, he's consistently going down from arm tackles and has really poor results trying to get extra yards after initial hits. The biggest issue is that he's almost always an upright runner, so he ends up giving up leverage, which causes poor leg drive and push forward. He can also sometimes slow up his legs when taking contact, which can make things worse. Also, while he does have a variety of moves to use in open space, his hips seem a bit tight, which sometimes can affect how he can execute those moves. Also, he often has decisiveness in his selection, leading to him often being a bit too slow to go with them, or just settling for dropping his shoulder to try to drive through the defender. So with a bit of a somber start, Giddens earned just a C- for his contact balance and B- for his elusiveness. Moving to some more positive areas for Giddens, his receiving and pass blocking. As I mentioned before, he has a lot of experience running routes past the line of scrimmage and from the slot. He also shows some really good ball tracking skills and is able to make catches over his shoulder. Also, he has one of the better transitions from receiver to rusher in this class and is so good at keeping his momentum forward to pick up extra yards after the catch. He also shows good awareness to move with his quarterback when he's scrambling to make himself an easier target. A number of people will point to his high number of drops this year as a sign that he isn't as good of a pass catcher as some people try to claim. And while those drops aren't ideal, I do think it's important to know that most of them came early in the season, and he only had 2 in his final 9 games. Also, his 2023 season showed even more signs that he has more reliable hands, with just 2 drops and 40 targets. So the rest of his career outside of that 3-game stretch at the beginning of the 2024 season just as likely was just a bad stretch for him. He also shows promise as a pass blocker. He's very good at identifying his assignment and does a good job getting square with his target. He is also good at using his hands and his blocks and sets a good base to help him give balance. Also, he has very good size and strength to be able to hold up in pass protection. That being said, he can sometimes duck his head and lunge a bit too often, leading to poor impact and defenders sliding off of him. Also, while his drops were a bit overblown, at the same time they did still happen, so he'll have to prove that they were just a rough stretch and not the new norm. Part of what could help reduce those drops is speeding up how quickly he gets his head turned around while out on his route. He can sometimes be a bit delayed in this, which can make it a bit of a rushed process for him to be able to become an available receiver and locate the ball. Regardless of the drops, Giddens still has proven to be a good pass catcher and one who can win downfield on routes, which earned him an A- for his receiving. Also, he has proven to be a reliable pass blocker and earned a B- for his pass blocking. For his vision and ball handling, he ran a good mix of gap and zone runs throughout his college career, but in the past he did have some shaky vision between the tackles. This year though, he seemed a lot more comfortable running between the tackles and did a better job finding cutback lanes. He also has a nice jump cut that lets him navigate traffic. His patience as a runner can be really good at times, and he typically does a good job hugging his blocks. That being said, his patience can sometimes tilt too far, where he's being a bit too indecisive around the line of scrimmage at times, but on the flip side, he can also rush things a little bit too much at the second level, which can also impact his ability to make consistent gains. He can also misread his leverage of blocks at times and doesn't look comfortable pressing the line yet. Also, while he had no fumbles in 2023, he did have 2 for 2024 and had a fumble rate of a fumble on every 113 touches. So with still some room to grow, he earned a B- for his vision. Also, a fair number of fumbles this year, he earned a B- for his ball handling as well. For his future role grade, his receiving grade likely indicates it, but he is one of the best receiving backs in this class. He's very comfortable making catches and contribute on downfield targets on a regular basis, which a lot of the other backs just aren't comfortable doing, even around the line of scrimmage. Also, he is dependable as a pass blocker and has good size to hold up in his blocks, which at least gives him good floor as a third down back. His great speed and explosiveness also gives him a chance to be more than that, but his stiffness in space, upright running style, and fluctuating vision may frustrate people wanting to be fans of his and could frustrate NFL coaches. So we're keeping his B- streak alive with a B- for his future role grade, since again, at the very least he should be a good pass catching or third down back as long as the drops are behind him. Also with his great athleticism, he earned a green flag for his athleticism or RAS score. For a summary of his strengths, while he isn't still as consistent as I'd like, he did run with improved vision, which is a good step in the right direction. Also, while he isn't able to properly execute the moves, he does have a variety of moves he can pull off in open space. Regardless of if he is going to be a major contributor as a rusher, he has a good floor as a third down back with good receiving upside and good potential as a pass blocker thanks to his size and strength. Also, that size does at least give him the potential to have better contact balance in the future if he is able to work on his pad level and take up some NFL coaching. That being said, his contact balance is really disappointing at times, in part due to him being a really upright runner with poor pad level. Also, he can have some pad level or leverage issues in pass blocking situations, which can decrease his anchor despite having good size as stonewall defenders. Also, though I do think he was just in a bit of a funk, he does need to prove that he's past his drops. The biggest thing that has me excited about him is his pass catching ability, but if he starts to drop the ball too frequently, then it would make it hard to justify having him out in those situations. Finally, in general, he just needs to improve his consistency. At times, he truly does look like one of the best backs in his class if he does drop his pads and makes those catches, is decisive as a runner, and is able to play up to his full potential. So by taking the average of all his grades, Giddens earned a 2.67 out of 4, which falls in my may have a future role tier. Consistency would be my number one note for Giddens in terms of what could determine his success in the NFL. His pad level, vision, ability in open space, and hands had a very wide range of results, going from a player who looks like a very good back to a player who is a backup at best. Maybe an NFL coaching staff will finally be able to help him take that next step and become a consistent force. However, if they don't, I do think a team could get very frustrated with him and decide to turn their attention elsewhere. As for a comp, I think Rachaad White is a pretty darn perfect comp for Giddens. Both have very good pass catching ability and do have a variety of moves that they can use in the open field. Both also have good size to hold up in pass protection and have the potential to have good contact balance. However, both can be wildly inconsistent with their pad level and not play up to their size. Also, both can struggle with finding a balance with their vision, leading to missed opportunities. White has kind of been known to be an average player for some time, but earned a lot of playing time thanks to his pass catching ability. Maybe Giddens can go to a similar situation, but I think it's more likely that he goes somewhere and operates as a receiving back. Which is fine, but he does have the potential to be much more than that. Unfortunately, I just don't know if we'll ever get to see the fruition of that potential. For our next back, we have former hopeful top back Donovan Edwards from Michigan. After a really promising 2022 campaign, Edwards stumbled in 2023 and never fully recovered in 2024. But starting with a look at his 2024 stats, he had just 128 carries for 589 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns for a respectable 4.6 yards per carry. What was less respectable though was his high number of fumbles with 3 fumbles. That's a very high number of fumbles per touch that he had, as we'll discuss later. Edwards was still involved as a pass catcher, but had his least efficient year with just 18 receptions for a measly 83 yards and a single touchdown. That being said, I do think it's fair to question if the poor quarterback play for Michigan led to a poor efficiency as well in the passing game for him. Looking at individual games including against Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, and Texas, he was pretty unremarkable in all these games with 10 or more touches in just the Indiana and Oregon games, getting over 50 yards in just the Indiana game, and failed to record more than 2 receptions or even over 2 receiving yards in any of the single selected games. Looking across the whole season, he failed to record a single 100-yard rushing game and also failed to get more than 23 receiving yards in a single game. That poor receiving yard total could be attributed to poor quarterback play, but the poor rushing results were likely due to his backfield partner looking better than him. I still have questions about Khalil Mullings that we'll definitely talk about in his part in the future, but it's disappointing to see Edwards get usurped despite all the talent he has. So let's take a look at some of his grades to see why he may have lost touches again this season. Starting with his contact balance and elusiveness, he will need to work on improving his contact balance, but he typically does a good job keeping his legs moving. Also, he has very good athleticism and explosive to make defenders miss in space and sometimes slide off of him. However, his contact balance is extremely disappointing given his physical gifts. He's an upright runner who went down at first tackle and arm tackles way too frequently. He also struggles to routinely finish runs going forward and often finds himself moving sideways, which kills his momentum. So with what is tied for the worst contact balance in the entire class for me, Edwards earned just a D+ for his contact balance. Maybe that will be viewed as a bit too harsh, but I'm just losing patience with Edwards and just haven't seen him make any positive improvements in that area for the past few years. His elusiveness was a lot better though and earned him a much better B. Now what Edwards is great at is pass catching. He has great hands and consistently catches the ball away from his body. He also looks very comfortable just in poorly placed balls. He's also able to run with very good routes from the slot and out wide, and he has good cuts to get open. When he does make a catch, he has a very fluid transition upfield and quickly gets to full speed. Honestly, it might be too late, and I'm honestly not sure he would have any interest in it, but I do think the most exciting prospect for him and outlook for him would be to pull a reverse Cordero Patterson and switch from running back to receiver. Also, while he does need to improve his pass blocking, his veteran experience shows with his blitz pickup recognition ability. The blocks themselves though do still need a lot of work as he looks raw technically despite his experience. He does a lot of lunging, diving, and reaching which leads to a high rate of unsuccessful blocks. Also, he will use his hands, but often will have poor hand placement, which lets defenders slide past him too easily. Defenders can also get past him due to his base often being iffy, which gives him a poor anchor. So with his great receiving upside and potential to benefit from a position change even, Edwards earned what will easily be his highest grade of an A- for his receiving. On the contrary, he earned one of his worst grades of a D+ for his pass blocking. As for his vision and ball handling, he can do a good job setting up blocks downfield to help deliver bigger gains. Between the tackles, he does show some nice moments of good tempo and improved patience this year. Also, he did a better job hugging his blocks, which again showed that he is capable of improving his vision. That being said, his vision only improved so much and is still a big reason why I feel like he would likely benefit from a position change. Despite his experience, he still really struggles to consistently read the leverage of his blocks. There were a lot of times when it seemed like he would get overwhelmed when trying to read his blocks and when running between the tackles. Also, while he does show the ability to run with good tempo and patience, he also rushes a lot of his runs as well. He needs to be more willing to just trust his blocks, since there's way too many times when he would unnecessarily bounce his runs outside, away from his blocks, and go hunting for a home run play. If he did want to make himself more successful at hunting big plays, he could leverage his athleticism by pressing the line of scrimmage more to create openings and break outside. Also, as I mentioned, he had a very poor fumble rate of a fumble on every 49 touches. Now, the good thing is he had very few fumbles in the past, so maybe this was just kind of a fluky thing for him this year, but he just needs to prove he can go back to protecting the ball like he did in the past. So despite his improving vision, it started from a really low point and only got up to a C- for him. His ball handling was also very poor this year and was tied for the worst ball handling grade of the entire class with a grade of a D-. For his future role grade, it's difficult because Edwards has a lot of the tools that should make him a great running back. He has great speed, acceleration, and burst that you just can't teach. That makes him a monster in open space and a big reason he had so many big runs in the past. Also, he is one of the better pass catchers in the class that further raises his upside. So, how is he not one of the best backs in the class? Well, his pass blocking is very far below average and likely won't get to a passable level based on the past few years. Also, his contact balance and vision are still so far behind that I think he's likely best suited to be a receiver to be able to avoid those weaknesses and leverage his strengths. So despite his upside, he earned just a C for his future role grade since he still has a lot of deficits that may just limit his path to playing time. However, he at least has elite athleticism and earned a green flag for his athleticism RAS score. In the summary of his strengths, he showed improved patience as a rusher, which is good to see that he can still make progress with his vision. Also, he's still very shifty and open spaced even if he got those opportunities less this year. He's also a very natural pass catcher who again could benefit from a position change. Regardless, he at least has the athleticism and pedigree to at least give him a chance to be still drafted this year. But if he wants to stick to playing running back, he'll need to improve his play-to-play vision and stop hunting home runs on every play. Also needs to improve his pad level as he's just way too easy to take down with the strength that he has. He also needs to refine his pass blocking as it's just so sloppy right now and will be a major liability on passing downs. Finally, he just needs to work on being more consistent. His flashes are great, but I think the general public is at the point that they also all realize that there are just flashes, and we may not be able to see his big plays happen frequently enough to justify using him. But taking the average of all his grades, Edwards earned just a 1.95 out of 4, which falls in my likely not worth rostering tier. I don't really like to talk down about prospects, and I feel like I've been doing that a lot with Edwards these past 3 years. So it's kind of just getting exhausting to not only continue to explain my rationale as to why he likely won't work in the NFL, but also to essentially continue to say that he likely doesn't have what it takes. Contrary to possible common relief, but I do really root for players like Edwards to prove me wrong and be more significant contributors in the NFL than I expect. However, Edwards may just have to make those contributions from the receiver spot based on what he's shown at the running back position these past few years. As for a comp, I have Pierre Strong Jr. as Edwards' comp. Strong was another player I was lower on than consensus, and seems that has aged well. Both have very good athleticism and natural pass catching ability that should translate to productivity in the NFL. However, both struggle with contact balance and vision to be able to deliver on that upside. Also, both play smaller than their size and may make you double check their listed height. Both also may lose pass catching opportunities if they don't improve their pass blocking. While Strong looks like a bottom of the roster player right now, Edwards has a chance to exceed that expectation and could benefit from switching to receiver before it's too late. Maybe position change or things at the running back position will finally click for him, but it will be interesting to see how high a team is willing to take a dart throw on him and how patient they're willing to be. Moving to our final running back of this part, and a lot of people's sleeper back this year, Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. After having flashes the previous seasons, Dylan Sampson got his chance to be the lead back at Tennessee and took off. Sampson broke both Tennessee's single-season rushing yards and touchdowns records with 1,491 rushing yards and 22 touchdowns on 258 carries for a yards per carry average of 5.8 yards. At the midway point of the season, he looked to have fairly few faults, but did start to lose the ball frequently with 4 fumbles in the second half of the season on his final 150 touches of the season. Also, he wasn't as productive as a pass catcher, but did make 20 receptions for 143 yards. For his highlight games against Vanderbilt, Georgia, Alabama, and Oklahoma, Sampson was very productive on the ground in all games, rushing for at least 92 yards and nearly getting a touchdown in every single one of those games. As expected based on season totals, he's fairly underused as a pass catcher, and looking across at the rest of the games from his season, he only managed to get more than 1 reception against a quality opponent in just 4 of his 10 games. So while he was very productive as a rusher in all of his games other than the Ohio State game when he did leave the game early for an injury, he's pretty underwhelming as a pass catcher throughout the season. But let's see if that was more of a usage issue and how good his rushing ability really is by looking at some of his grades. Starting with Sampson's contact balance and elusiveness, a big reason why Sampson was so successful on the ground last year was his ability to make defenders miss. He runs with great pad level and consistently keeps his legs moving to often finish his runs forward despite his smaller size. Also, he has some really good timing that he pairs with his quick feet to make defenders miss in space. He has a variety of moves that help him evade tacklers in open space, and his great change of direction ability also allows him to make a cut at the last moment to evade a defender. When he is unable to evade a defender, he has good awareness to be able to adjust his body and lets him to blow to help him slide off the tackle. That being said, Sampson does struggle against heavy boxes and struggles to get consistent drive against them, especially due to his smaller frame. Speaking of heavy boxes, similar to when I brought this up with Jalen Wright last season, it's hard to just accept his production and avoid. For those who aren't aware, Tennessee's offense has a focus on stretching out the defense and thinning out the area in front of the line of scrimmage. That leads to a lot of his runs with equal numbers or even number advantages that let athletic backs get a guaranteed 3 to 4 yards or more depending on the back and how the blocks are held up. While I don't have numbers to definitely back it up, the eye test shows that the difference between Sampson's success against heavy boxes and even fronts is significantly worse than against smaller fronts. This decreased production is expected, but it still makes me kind of question how much of his production truly could translate to the NFL. So with some consideration that the scheme may be helping him, Sampson earned a B for his contact balance and elusiveness. For his receiving and pass blocking, Sampson wasn't overly involved in the passing game, but he did show a solid foundation to build off of. He has good hands when the ball is on his frame and seems to do a good job tracking the ball. Also, he has very good transition from receiver to rusher to make the most of his athleticism in those situations. Finally, while there are a lot of areas he needs to improve as a blocker, as his grade will likely indicate soon, some of his struggles could be explained due to lack of experience. So there is at least hope that he can develop with more practice and snaps. It'll be vital for him to improve as a pass blocker and show that his struggles were just due to inexperience because it is really rough right now. He's often slow in recognizing his assignment and often looks lost trying to find a target. His feet are also just a bit slow and he overall seems hesitant in pass protection. That leads to him having weak punches, taking poor angles, and overall just looking too passive, which often allows defenders to make first contact and dictate the battle. He needs to work on having more urgency, getting better leverage, and being a faster processor to not be a liability, since right now he just very rarely stops his assignment and more often just kind of gets bowled into the pocket. I think a good place to start for him would be to have more conviction to at least provide good chip blocks to be able to help his tackles, since he sometimes can just ignore a tackle's block dissolving in front of him. Finally, I want to see Sampson prove that he can be more reliable as a pass catcher as well. He's primarily just used on dump off and screen passes and hasn't shown the ability to consistently contribute from receiver spots with just 22 career snaps from either the slot or out wide. I also want to see him have better hand strength when he catches the ball away from his body, since it can sometimes look a little bit shaky when he goes for a catch outside his frame. So maybe it's a bit generous, but just in the limited opportunities I saw and the ability to pair his receiving skills with his athleticism, Sampson did earn a B for his receiving. However, I was much less generous with his pass blocking as he earned a D, which is tied for the worst pass blocking in the entire class. For his vision and ball handling, Sampson shows really good awareness with his vision as he's a patient runner who lets holes develop. When a hole does open up, he uses great burst and speed to blast through the hole while hugging his block to get the most out of the opening. Even if the hole is narrow, he does a great job getting skinny to sneak through the hole while maintaining his great speed to have a good chance of finishing a run in the end zone. When things are more congested, he has quick choppy feet to sort through the traffic and does a good job pressing the line to get the defense biting and then using his burst to break their pursuit angle. He was fantastic in gap runs this season, with his ability to get defenders off balance or make them miss in tight corners, then use his burst to blast past them for a good gain. However, as I mentioned, a lot of his vision only needed to make reads on even or weak fronts, which made things very easy for him, so it is worth questioning how translatable that vision is. Outside of that, he will also sometimes miss cutback lanes and misread the leverage of his blocks, leading to missed opportunities for bigger runs. I also like to see him run with a bit more tempo and fewer jump cuts, as it can sometimes limit the holes he's able to go back and hit. That may also help him in short yard situations that he can struggle to get consistent drive against heavy fronts. Also, Sampson absolutely needs to hold on to the ball, as he had a fumble rate of fumble on every 70 touches, and a fumble on every 38 touches if you just go off of his final 7 games of the season. So while I may be being generous with his vision again, since the scheme does make things a lot easier for him, Sampson earned a B for his vision. However, I can't be as generous with his ball handling since it's based on my scale, which had him at a C for his ball carrying. For Sampson's future role grade, there is a lot to like. He has fantastic athleticism, which is on display every snap even if he didn't do it all at the combine. He has fantastic athleticism, which was on display every snap he played, even if he didn't do all the drills at the combine. That athleticism makes him such a threat in open space. Also, while his vision may need to be taken with a grain of salt, I do want to reward some good habits that should translate to the NFL. Also, he has some good habits as a pass catcher to potentially be more involved in the passing game in the NFL if given the chance. What might hold him back though from contributing more in passing downs in the NFL is his pass blocking, since it's just such a huge liability and it may be limited due to his small frame. Also, his frame could also hold him back from having good contact balance in the NFL. And finally, his fumbles could hold him back as well from getting more regular use if this does become a more regular issue for him. So with a good skill set, Sampson earned a B- for his future role grade. Despite not having all of his athletic testing, I feel comfortable giving him a green flag based on what he showed on film. Plus, I just can't resist making this a perfect 5 for 5 for green flags anyways. For a summary of Sampson's strengths, he is incredibly elusive and has a variety of moves in his arsenal to make defenders miss in space. When things are more congested, he's good at navigating traffic and finding openings to exploit. Also, he has a possibly high receiving upside that Tennessee didn't use as much that could excite NFL teams that they pair with his fantastic athleticism. Now, some things that make me less of a fan of Sampson than others are first his pass blocking. It's really rough right now, and I just don't know if it'll become passable with his frame. Also, his fumble issues could throw a wrench in him earning playing time if his fumbles do become more of a regular thing and close to as high as they were in the second half of his year. I also like to see him use more tempo than chop steps, just to make things a bit quicker and add more flexibility to be able to hit cutback holes. Finally, I don't think it can be ignored how much his offensive scheme likely helped him. He won't be facing the same types of boxes in the NFL as he did in college, and that could put him in for a rude awakening. So by taking the average of all his grades, Sampson earned just a 2.62 out of 4, which falls in my may have a future role tier. These low grades and overall rankings are meant to be a hot take, as I've been low on Sampson dating back to the 2024 summer rankings that I did leading up to the 2024 season. I'm just a bit suspicious of Tennessee's schemes and how it helps running backs. While Sampson did things outside the schemes that impressed me, it is hard to ignore the high number of times he benefited from the scheme and faced spread out small fronts. Add in issues as a pass blocker, holding onto the ball, and limited receiving experience, and he just starts to pop up a lot of red flags that make me want to consider other backs. It might be a controversial take since he has struggled to make an impact at the start of his career, but I still do think that Jalen Wright was a better overall prospect last year. However, the NFL didn't have a very high view on Wright, with him falling to the 4th round, and I wouldn't be surprised if Sampson sees a similar fall and have him go day 3 despite a lot of people having him much higher in their current rankings. As for a comp that I think is a player that has a similar skill set, but also has some excitement leading up to the draft, and coincidentally enough also played at Tennessee for some time, I have Ty Chandler as Sampson's comp. Both Chandler and Sampson have great athleticism with quick feet and explosiveness in their cuts to break off some quality runs. Both are also patient runners who often use chop steps to navigate traffic and get to their desired route. Neither were prominent pass catchers in college, but did show the potential to be more regular contributors in the NFL. Unfortunately, both are also very poor pass blockers, which could lose them those opportunities in those same situations. Also, both struggle to get much head-on push due to their smaller frames, which could be more limited than what some want to admit. Chandler had some flashes, but has struggled to get a regular role in the NFL, and I have worries the same could happen to Sampson, but I think the draft capital and team fit will be the deciding factor if teams do view him higher than I do and see him more as a lead back than maybe a possible committee back. And that's all for this set of backs. Let me know what your thoughts are on all the backs in the comments and who you think I'm too high or too low on. This is now part 2 of 7, so there'll still be several more evals done over the next couple of weeks. So be sure you don't miss any of them, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the videos, it would help the channel and the series grow thanks to you. If you want just a read form of the eval, you can subscribe to my Substack as I'll have the full rain evals out for each player at the same time as the video. But thank you all and see you all next time.